On the 10th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 10 true crime cases, 9 somethings, 8 pounds of heroin, 7, who knows, 6, what the hell's, 5 golden... Wait, why would someone give me 10 true crime cases for Christmas? 10 murders for Christmas. Thanks. Thanks a heap, jolly sons of... You know, I'm more than just true crime cases, alright? Gift givers, okay? Maybe, I don't know, an Xbox game would be nice instead of, gifting me a murder. I don't know, a scented candle, perhaps? Pine scented, because that's my favorite. What was the wink for? I don't know. Anyway, I hope you're sitting down enjoying the holiday with your family, full of joy and happiness, because I'm here to ruin it. I'm gifting you with 10 true crime cases. Yeah, I'm giving you the murder cases, okay? I'm giving the gift back to you. Yeah, I'm returning it. Macy's didn't want it, so I'm giving it back to you. Is Macy's still around? I don't know. So, these are 9 cases that occurred during the Christmas season, and then I also threw in 1 case that occurred during Hanukkah. So, fill up your wine glasses and get your tears ready, because Christmas is meant to be grim. Oh, I forgot. Hello, ho, 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 true crimers. I'm about as fat as Santa, so that makes sense. Anyway, viewer discretion is advised. The first case is the case of Za'Zell Preston. She would go by Zizi. 26-year-old Zizi was married to 29-year-old William Wallace in Anaheim, California. Zizi was just a few weeks away from graduating from Cypress College. Her goal, her aspirations, were to get into domestic violence counseling. She was also an excellent dancer. Not to mention, and most importantly, she was a wonderful mother of 3 beautiful children. Her first 2 children, 2 girls, were from a previous relationship, and then she had a baby that she had with William. Zizi herself was sadly a victim of domestic violence because William Wallace treated her like crap. He would hit her, punch her, choke her. She tried to leave him on multiple occasions, but again, it's a lot easier said than done. But it would all come to an end on Christmas Eve 2011. That Christmas Eve night, Zizi and William got into some kind of argument about something. One thing led to another, and Zizi's oldest daughter, who was about 8 years old at the time, witnessed the 2 of them fighting verbally, which then led to William taking it to a physical level, hitting her, and then he threw Zizi onto a glass coffee table where she smashed through it and fell unconscious. As a matter of fact, the force of that was so bad that it actually ended up killing her. The 8-year-old child was then forced by William to help him take pieces of glass out of, her mother's body. William then moved her body to the bedroom where on a couple of occasions he actually dropped her. Then, and this whole thing is awful, but the worst part is that the following morning, Christmas morning, he took her body, propped her up on the couch, and he made the 2 kids open up Christmas presents in front of their dead mother. He told the 2 girls, "Mommy ruined Christmas. Mommy got drunk and ruined Christmas." He would soon then be arrested and charged with her murder. For some reason, it took many years for this case to actually go to trial, like almost, I think, around 9 years or so. So he was in jail the entire time. In 2021, he was found guilty and convicted of second-degree murder. He would be sentenced to 15 years to life and was already given 9 years time served. So he got credit. So technically, by the time he was convicted, he only has a few years left to serve before he can ask for parole. Doesn't mean he will be, but he can be. All right, case number 2. I just now realized, look at that, the lights are askew. Fixed it. Oh, I'm covering the owl. Merry Christmas, Peterson the owl. Oh, you're a real hoot. Case number 2 is about Kevin Showalter. This took place on Christmas Eve 1973 in New London, Connecticut. 20-year-old college student Kevin Showalter was on his way home from some sort of Christmas party, and he was in a car that was being driven by his friend Deborah, and she was just driving him home that night. When all of a sudden she got a flat tire, so she had to pull off to the side of the road, and this was on Pequot Avenue, and this part of that road was pretty dark, not a lot of street lights. So Kevin, being the gentleman that he was, he offered to switch her tire out for her to put on the spare tire, and so that's what was going to happen. As he was kneeling over next to the car, all of a sudden another vehicle just flies by, just screams by, and it hits Kevin Showalter dead on, and it kind of launches him, forward. The car that hit him, it just kept going. Didn't stop, didn't hesitate, it just kept speeding on by. The accident occurred at 11:11 p.m., and that's exactly the time he was killed, because he died instantly. Police botched this investigation from the get-go. They actually ended up losing evidence pretty quickly. For example, they had collected a broken off piece of taillight. They also found some green automobile putty. I'm not sure what that is, but they, somewhere in the interim, have lost it. And so the physical evidence that they would have had to possibly convict someone was gone. They also lost Kevin's personal belongings that were on him at the time. There were traces of green paint on Kevin's clothes, but police would say, "Oh, that has nothing to do with anything. Those marks were already on his clothing before this even happened." How would you know that? What? It would end up taking 3 years, and 3 years of Kevin's mother being extremely persistent for them to get a grand jury to investigate this case properly. And they actually ended up coming to a conclusion. They believe they know who did this. The likely suspect was the former mayor of New London, Connecticut. His name was Harvey Malov. This may be the reason why police conveniently lost evidence. He was a jewelry salesperson at the time of this case, and he was very rich, too. So, money plus, power equals, I get away with murder. So, one of the reasons why he became the main focus is because he himself placed himself at the scene. He said in an interview that at 11:12 p.m., 1 minute after the accident took place, he drove by the scene. He saw a green car parked next to where Kevin's friend's car was. And then he said he also saw the young woman, supposedly Deborah, speaking to a middle-aged man at the scene of the crime. The main problem with this is Deborah herself said, "There was no other vehicle parked next to me when this happened. The car who hit him took off immediately and didn't even stop." So, and also she said, "I didn't speak to anyone at the crime scene. The only other vehicles that were there were the ambulance when it showed up about 2 or 3 minutes later. Certainly not a green vehicle, and it was not a middle-aged man," and she said, "I wasn't really talking to anyone." However, Harvey Malov was never charged with anything. In 1979, a man by the name of Paul Hansen came forward to say he thinks he may have been the one to kill Kevin. He said that night he was very drunk and he was driving. He recalls that as he was driving down Pequot Avenue, he suddenly heard like a loud thud on his car, But he didn't stop and he just kept going. Then he said the next morning on Christmas Day, he went to his garage and saw there was some pretty bad damage to the front of his vehicle. So he just assumed or thought he was the one to do it. But by his own account, he was also severely drunk. But even if it was him, there is no physical evidence to tie him to it, because again, it was all lost. And he wasn't even positive that he was the one to do it. Police tried to reopen the case around 2005, but that was quickly a dud because they had conveniently lost literally all of the documents, all of the grand jury findings, all of it. Gone. Lost. Disappeared. Again, very convenient how that happened, considering that the main suspect, again, was the former mayor and a very wealthy businessman. Now, they have absolutely nothing, and this case will likely never be solved. Case number 3. Ellie Emo was a 20-year-old student at the Kemi School of Economics in Kemi, Finland. It was just a couple of weeks away from Christmas Day, the day of the year that Ellie essentially loved the most. She was a big Christmas person, big holiday person. She was a very joyous, happy, spunky, sporadic type person. But she would never get to see Christmas 1955, because on December 7th, 1955, tragedy would take place. That night, she planned to meet up with some friends to grab some food, hang out, possibly go catch a movie at the nearby cinema. She hung out with 2 of her very closest friends, and about 9 p.m. or so, one of the friends said, "All right, I have to call it a night." And so that friend took off and left on her own, and she walked home. Ellie then decided to walk home with her other friend that was there, Mela, because the direction of their houses were the same. But at one point, they were going to have to split off on 2 different paths to get to their respective houses. According to Mela, it was about 9:30 p.m. when they hit those 2 separate paths and went their separate ways. And that was the last time that anyone would ever see Ellie alive again. At approximately 9:45 p.m., one of Ellie's neighbors would hear a very loud, blood-curdling scream come from somewhere outside of the building where they lived. And then a moment or two later, she heard a muffled scream, as if someone was possibly covering someone's mouth. But, this neighbor said, "Man, it's Christmas time. People are at Christmas parties. People are being stupid. So it's probably just that." So the neighbor went to bed. But Ellie, she never actually got home. This wasn't really a concern for Ellie's parents, though, because Ellie was 20 years old, and she's always out with friends. And she would also spend the night at friends' houses, just randomly at times. So they thought, oh, maybe she just slept at her friend's house. But they would find out the next afternoon that that was definitely not the case. At approximately 12:50 p.m. on December 8th, 1955, on a pathway that was less than 100 feet from Ellie's doorstep, Ellie's body was found, and it was lying next to a big boulder. She had been absolutely mangled. She had stab wounds to her face, to the back of her neck, to her actual back. She had cuts across her throat. She was fully clothed, and there was no indication that she had been sexually assaulted. Back in 1955, though, they didn't have all of the stuff that we have now to really determine that, but they didn't believe that she was. All of her money was still there. Her purse was there, and she had quite a bit of money in her wallet, but it wasn't stolen, so police thought, well, this isn't robbery, so was this just a random killing? They did find a sheath to a knife kind of near her body. They also found some shoe prints leading away from her body, and they also found some what looked like possibly a bike had driven through the snow. On December 15th, 1955, someone would turn in a knife that they found just abandoned on a city bus. And the brand of that knife, or the type of knife, was a Mora knife. And that actually happened to be the sheath that was found at the crime scene was also a Mora sheath. So they thought, well, maybe that's the knife that was used, but they really couldn't determine that. Again, this is way before DNA. This is way before they knew how to preserve evidence correctly for DNA testing. So the knife really provided nothing, and they had no idea if it even was the real one. And at this point, we never really will know. The time of the murder was determined to be somewhere between 9:45 p.m. and about 9:50 p.m. And this is because after all the witness statements and testimonies, they know that she had split off from her friend at approximately 9:30 p.m. And then around 10 p.m., 10:05 p.m., other witnesses said they had been walking in the area. They didn't see anything, hear anything. But then those muffled and loud screams came from 9:40 to 9:45 p.m. So that's kind of the window of time they believe this murder took place. So it was very quick and it was very sudden. And whoever did it got out of Dodge really quick. Police would question several people, including a school mate of Ellie's, who apparently he had a beef with Ellie for a little bit, but they were able to rule him out based on his alibi. And apparently it was a very, very solid alibi. There had also been murders that occurred kind of around the same time to women who are about the same age, in that same area. So police were thinking, well, possibly could be a serial killer. But it would be determined that at least a couple of those killings were by a person who was ruled out of being able to commit this particular murder. So again, they were at a dead end. They didn't know if this was some sort of unknown serial killer that just sort of vanished into the night and left nothing behind. They don't know. It's now 60 years later at this point, over 60 years later, and pretty much whoever was the killer is probably dead by now, or very close to it. And this case, unfortunately, I don't think it will ever be solved. Case number 4, this is our Hanukkah case. December 28th, 2019 was the 7th night of the Hanukkah holiday. Rabbi Chaim Rottenberg was having a get-together at his home. He had about 100 people over, and this was to celebrate lighting the candles for the 7th night of Hanukkah. He was from the Kosan Hasidic dynasty. At approximately 10 p.m., during all of the festivities, everyone was having a good time, an unknown man walked into his house, and this man had a scarf wrapped around his face to disguise himself, and he was wielding a very large knife. They weren't sure if it was like a machete or something else, but it was large. And just out of nowhere, this man just starts stabbing people. He goes around and just starts waving the knife around, and it appears to be just completely random. Of the 100 people that were there, he did manage to stab about 5 people, which thankfully he didn't have a gun, because this would be a lot worse if he did. 4 of the victims suffered severe injuries, but they would all recover and survive. Unfortunately, Rabbi Chaim Rottenberg, he had been stabbed in the head, and he had suffered a severe skull fracture. He had fallen into a coma. 59 days later, he would unfortunately pass away. Now, during the attack, the attacker was attacked by other people there to wrestle the weapon out of his hand. And this discombobulated him a lot, so he basically just like, and he fled the scene. And then he tried to go to a synagogue that was basically right next door. But thankfully, the doors there were locked, so he got frazzled. He was then seen getting into his car, and survivors of the attack he just did happened to see his license plate, and they managed to remember it and write it down. So they told police right away, and within an hour after the attack took place, police found him in Harlem. By the way, this attack took place in Monsey, New York. Forgot to mention that. When he was pulled over, he was just covered in blood. He had blood all over his car. And they arrested him without any incident. The man was 37-year-old Grafton E. Thomas. He was someone who had been arrested at least 7 times in the past. typically for assaults and also drug-related charges and some robberies. In his possession were journals that he wrote, and they expressed some pretty severe anti-Semitic views. He also had on his person books about Hitler, so I guess he was a fan. At his place of residence, they also searched his computer, and his search history had things like, why did Hitler kill the Jews? He also searched for German Jewish temples near me. About a year or two prior, he had actually been diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He would end up being charged for this. He was charged specifically with second-degree murder, and he was also charged with federal hate crimes. Good. But the bad is he was determined to be incompetent to stand trial. The man was just so far gone mentally that they were just not going to be able to go forward with a prosecution. So he is now essentially locked up in a mental institution indefinitely. Case number 5 is one you are all probably pretty familiar with if you are a fan of the true crime genre. This is the case of the Sodder children. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George and Jenny Sodder had 10 children, 9 of which lived at the house with them. Sometime around 10 or 10:30 p.m. on that Christmas Eve, the children had gone to bed, and shortly thereafterwards, George and Jenny had gone to bed themselves. Sometime around midnight, Jenny was awoken suddenly by the sound of the phone ringing. When she answered the phone, she heard a woman's voice asking for a person who did not live at the home. It was someone that Jenny did not know. She did not recognize the woman's voice, and in the background of the caller's end, Jenny heard like laughing. She heard glasses clinking, like some kind of party was going on, and then just kind of out of nowhere, the call dropped. She hung up. Jenny just obviously assumed that this was a wrong number. 30 minutes later, Jenny is awoken again by a loud thud on the roof of the house. And then it's followed very shortly afterwards by the sound of something rolling down the roof. She was tired, not thinking much about it. She fell back asleep. About 30 minutes later, she wakes up again because she smells smoke. George's office was on fire. So she woke George up, and the fire itself had just began to spread. So the house was engulfed in flames very quickly. George and Jenny managed to get 4 of the children out of the house safely. The other 5 children were kind of up in an area of the house that was already at that point blocked by fire, so they couldn't get through it. So they got everyone out, and then they're, frantically trying to find ways to get inside the house to get the other 5 kids. They don't see any of them leaving the home. They don't hear them screaming or anything. They don't see them kind of trying to get out windows. There's no sign of the other 5 kids. George races to get his ladder to, prop against the house to go upstairs to get the kids out. But the ladder is suddenly nowhere to be found. It was always in one spot, but it wasn't there that one time. Then he decides, okay, I'm going to get my trucks. I'm going to back the trucks up to the house. I'm going to climb on the trucks and do it. But suddenly, both of his trucks, 2 of them, both of them won't start. They started the day before, now they won't. Before all of the craziness, Jenny did try to pick up the phone to call someone. But the phone suddenly, there was nothing on the other end. So they assumed that the fire had burnt through the phone lines. A local man had driven past the property, noticed the fire. He then drove to a local bar where he called authorities to have the fire station come out. Unfortunately, the chief at the time, I guess, couldn't drive, so he had to wait for someone to get there to drive the fire truck. So it took hours. Now, meanwhile, the Sodder home is burning, and apparently after about 45, 50 minutes or so, the house had completely burnt and collapsed, and the fire sort of began to dissipate on its own, but the house was just gone. The firemen arrive a couple hours later. Now it's early in the morning. And they're basically just there to put out the fire that still is kind of just lingering there. But after everything was said and done, the search of the property, they found no traces of the other 5 Sodder children. There were no bones. There was nothing. So what they did was they just said, well, the children unfortunately burnt to ash, and they're gone. The chief said that the fire had to have been so hot that the children were basically cremated, which was very unusual. It's not something that really happens often. The fire chief would say that the fire was likely caused by faulty wiring, but some of the family members had issues with that because they all noticed that their Christmas lights on the house, they were on, even during the fire, as the fire was going on. They also noticed other lights in the house were on. Usually with faulty wiring, it's in that back then that's going to cause a power outage, but the power seemed to still be on. The family themselves would discover the ladder. It was 75, 80 feet away or so, and it appeared to be thrown down an embankment, as if someone purposely threw it there so that they couldn't find it. They also found out that the phone lines were not burnt by the fire. They were deliberately cut. So who cut them? Because Jenny got a call around midnight or so, and then by 1:30-ish, suddenly the phone lines were cut. So what happened? The family then questioned how the 5 bodies were burnt that badly that they just turned to dust and ash. They actually went to the local crematorium and asked the people there, and they said that typically human bones will still remain even after the fire, which is like 2,000 degrees, and 2 hours or so burning. The bones are still there. Which is unusual because the fire could not have been that hot at the house, and it only burnt for 45, 50 minutes. Sure, it smoldered for a while, but the flames weren't nearly as hot by that time. So, how? What about that mysterious phone call that Jenny got? Well, police allegedly tracked down the caller, and the caller said that it was a wrong number, and that was it. What about the loud thud that Jenny heard on the roof? Could it have been some sort of Molotov cocktail, some sort of instrument to set the house on fire? Police and the fire chief, they just disregarded it. It's nothing. The entire investigation just seemed to be really half-assed. Like, they just couldn't care. They just kids just burnt up and that's it. Because what it looks like is someone started the fire and then deliberately prevented the family from getting help. That's what it looks like. And the 5 kids, not a trace of them was ever found. In 1949, George managed to get people to excavate the property, and they actually did uncover a couple of small vertebrae. It was determined that these vertebrae were from the same person, and they had to have come from someone who was between the ages of 16, 17, up to about 22 years old. But the oldest possible victim would have been about 14 years old. The bone fragments also had no signs of any kind of fire contact. There was no burn marks or anything. And then the experts said, well, if we found those bone fragments, we should have found full skeletal remains. But they didn't. So there is the rumor, the belief that those bone fragments were planted there after the fact. So what are our options here? Well, one, it was an accidental fire, and the kids just somehow burnt to ash, and that's it. That's the truth. Or someone, for some reason, set the house on fire and kidnapped 5 of the Sodder children. For what? For why? Who knows? At one point, the Sicilian mafia was blamed for it, and that the 5 kids were probably somewhere in Italy. But there was never any proof of that. The family put up a giant billboard to, for if anyone knows anything, but they never really got anywhere close to finding the actual children. There were people who called and said, I think they're here. I think I saw them there. I saw one of them here. I saw one of them there. But none of it really led to anything. Unfortunately, George died in 1969 and Jenny died in 1989. They died either both not knowing the truth, or they both died not believing the truth. But they never got the answers they wanted. To this day, the disappearance or murder of the 5 Sodder children remains one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in United States history. Case number 6, Michelle ODowd. On Friday, December 2nd, 2011, a man named Phil had gone to the house where his sister Michelle was living at the time to check on her because she had not gone to work and no one had heard from her. The door to her home when he got there was unlocked, so he just sort of, opened the door a little bit, called out Michelle's name. He also called out for the roommate's name, but no one ever answered. Tried a couple more times, nothing. So he decided, you know what, I'm concerned, I'm going in. So he walked into the house, he began looking around, and, calling out her name, nothing. And then he sees the Christmas tree, and then underneath there's like Christmas gifts that are sort of just like ripped open, and it looked like someone had gone through them to try to steal some of the items that were in the wrapping. But when he got closer, he saw a foot. And when he moved the packages away, it was the body of his sister, his 67-year-old twin, Michelle. She had been severely beaten, but her cause of death ultimately was strangulation. The house belonged to 37-year-old Patty White. This was a, good friend of Michelle's. Michelle was a little down on her luck around this time, and she needed a place to stay, so Patty was kind enough to let her stay with her. It turns out, however, that Patty had, other, reasons to let Michelle stay there. She planned to steal Michelle's credit cards, and she had been caught a day or so after the body was found because she had been still using her credit cards. And it would be determined that Patty White was the one to actually kill Michelle. So she was arrested and charged with the murder. She would be convicted, and then the courts there in South Carolina, they would sentence her to 45 years in prison. Case number 7. It was a cold Christmas day in 2013 in Edinburgh, Scotland. 47-year-old Alan Williamson was asked to come to his neighbor's house because she apparently had some gifts for him. And the two of them, they had some riffs, some beef. They didn't really get along very well, but he kind of just figured, it's Christmas, maybe, she wants to do something nice. Who knows? So he knocked on the door of 37-year-old Melissa Young, and he walked into her house, and the gifts she wanted to give him were a pair of unisex trainers. I'm assuming that's shoes. And also a copy of The Sun, which is a newspaper out there, their kind of scandalous calendar. And Alan was like, oh no, thank you, but I'll pass. He didn't want the gifts. He rejected them. So Melissa did what anyone would do, right? No, she stabbed him 29 times and let his body just fall to the ground right there behind her door. Police were called because the neighbors heard a very obvious altercation taking place. They heard screams and whatnot, so when they got there, Melissa opened the door. She was just covered in blood. There was a knife there at her feet, and there was a body at her feet as well. So she was promptly arrested and charged with the murder of Alan Williamson. She would go on to admit to killing him, but not murdering him. So she had a tattoo of the Virgin Mary on one of her arms, and on the other arm she had a tattoo of Satan. Yeah. She told police that the Archangel Michael possessed her, and that she was an instrument of God to punish the unclean demons. She said when Alan rejected the gifts, she suddenly saw a bright light, and the voices in her head started to tell her what to do. So she stabbed him 29 times. The courts believed that she genuinely suffered from some personality disorders, but they determined that she was more than aware of what she was doing and that her mental impairments did not cause her to do what she did. She did that with her own free thinking. So she would be convicted, and she was sentenced where she had to serve at least 20 years in prison before she could ask for parole. I think it's different in other countries where it's like they don't have like, you're not sentenced to 20 years to life. You're sentenced to just 20 years, and then after that we go and go and go until we determine you are okay to leave prison or we keep you there. Case number 8 is Kristy Bamu. Christy Bamu was a 15-year-old boy visiting his sister in London. He and a couple other of his siblings had traveled from France to their sister's place in London for the holiday. His sister's name was Magali, and she was dating a man by the name of Eric Bakubi. The first day there, everything seemed to be going normal. It was just kind of like, yay, we're family, we're together, Merry Christmas. But that happiness and joy lasted a very, very brief amount of time. Eric Bakubi and Magali, they were somehow convinced that Christy and his siblings, well, they had brought something to the house, something evil. Eric accused the kids of bringing something called kindoki to their home, which is basically a form of witchcraft. For the next 4 days, the kids are brutally tortured, they're beaten, and they are being yelled at to confess that they are witches, and that once they do, this will all stop. Christy seemed to get the brunt of the attacks, though. Like, he was, poked with knives, he was beat with sticks, with metal bars. They would smash his face into the ceramic tile, which broke the tile. They shoved bottles inside of him. They also took a hammer and chisel to him. Eventually, the other siblings would, confess to being witches, and their torture basically stopped. They also said that Christy was constantly asking for forgiveness, but Magali, his sister, just seemed to not care. 4 days into the visit, Eric and Magali decided they were going to perform an exorcism on Christy. So they put him in a filled-up bathtub, and they continually dunked him underwater as to perform this ritual or whatever. And eventually, on one of the times they brought him up, he was no longer breathing. They held him underwater for too long, and he drowned. The two would be arrested after, obviously, altercations were reported and the body was found. And then the other kids, they told police exactly what happened. Apparently, Eric Bakubi suffered some severe head trauma, and so his brain wasn't right. Go figure. But he was still able to determine right from wrong, and he knew what he was doing. He would get a minimum sentence of 30 years, where Magali would get a minimum sentence of 25 years. Case number 9, the Santa of Covina. It was Christmas Eve in 2008 in Covina, California, which is just a little outside of Los Angeles. Sylvia Ortega Pardo was enjoying a family gathering at one of her family members' homes. There was about 25 people there just celebrating the holiday, opening up a couple of gifts, having dinner, just a good old time. But all of that goodness ended at 11:30 p.m. when a knock came to the door. 8-year-old Katrina opened the door, and when she did so, it was Santa Claus. He was there. She could tell who it was, though, dressed as Santa, and it was her uncle, Bruce Pardo. He was not empty-handed. He had a big wrapped box. He was also wielding 4 9mm handguns. In the box was a homemade flamethrower. The moment that Katrina opened the door, he shot her directly in the face. And then panic immediately ensued. Everyone's running. It's chaos. People are trying to escape. And he is just opening fire, just randomly shooting. And apparently the people that he managed to hit, he would then walk up to them and just execute them right there on the spot. Then he unwrapped this box. Yeah, he actually used wrapping paper and everything to unveil the flamethrower, which he then began to burn the house with. He was just spraying fire everywhere. The news would later report that the flames were like 20, 30 feet in the air. It was pretty extreme, and the house was very quickly engulfed in flames. Of the 25 people that were there that night, Bruce managed to kill 9 of them. His 43-year-old ex-wife, Sylvia Ortega Pardo, 70-year-old Alicia Sotomayor Ortega, 79-year-old Joseph Ortega, 50-year-old Charles Ortega, 45-year-old Sherry Lynn Ortega, 52-year-old James Ortega, 52-year-old Teresa Ortega, 46-year-old Alicia Ortega, and 17-year-old Michael Andre Ortiz. 8-year-old Katrina, who had been shot in the face, actually managed to survive, as did 2 other people who were injured during the attack. Bruce managed to remove the Santa suit. He got into his rented car and he drove 30 miles to his brother's home. His brother was out of town. Police tracked his movements and they found him at his brother's house, and he was dead. He died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. On his leg, he had strapped like a whole bunch of cash. They truly believe that his plan was to flee after the murders, but what they discovered was that his Santa suit had burnt badly during when he was using the flamethrower, and he got 3rd-degree burns over a large portion of like his body. And he certainly couldn't go to a hospital to get treated because he would then probably get caught. So he decided to, well, I'm not going to prison. I'm going to just end it here. They found his rented car parked outside, which they called the bomb squad to first, go to. And the car eventually burst into flames. And so whatever evidence they had, it was lost in the fire. What was the motive? They determined that likely it was money. You see, he and Sylvia had recently divorced, and the courts had ordered Bruce to pay her $10,000, like one lump sum, plus an additional about $1,700 or so monthly in spousal support. Right after that, he was fired from his job because he was falsifying his time records, saying he worked longer than he actually did each day. So money was now tight. He had nothing. He had to give it all to Sylvia. So he decided to take revenge and kill her and her family. I hope you are restless in hell, Bruce. Case number 10. It was Christmas Eve, 2014, in Paradise, Pennsylvania. 34-year-old Stephanie Hefner was a loving mother of 2 children. She was married to 36-year-old Dustin Lee Klopp. Stephanie and Dustin had a very tumultuous relationship back in 2008. She had gotten a protective order against him because he beat her, punched her, choked her, threw her against a wall, and threatened to kill her. So she managed to actually get the protective order, and she got away from him for a little while. But for some reason, she then withdrew all of her complaints, and they got back together. And they actually ended up getting married in 2011. On Christmas night 2014, Dustin Lee Klopp would call police to report himself. He said that he had murdered his wife the night before. Police went to the home, and sure enough, they found Stephanie Hefner's body. She had been physically beaten, her throat was cut, and her head was bashed in with an axe. Dustin said they got into an argument. One thing led to another. He punched her. She fell unconscious. She wasn't waking up, so he decided to just, keep going, and he just killed her. Brutally. Apparently, the kids, thankfully, did not hear or see anything. The kids are now with Stephanie's family, by the way. He was arrested and charged with her murder, of course, but he would not face punishment because he took the coward's way out. While in his prison cell in 2015, he ended his own life. So, justice was not truly served, but at least he is gone and cannot hurt anyone ever again. So, that is it for today's video. I know this is going to be a long video, so sorry or you're welcome, depending on how you feel. I hope you have a wonderful holiday, whether it's Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever you celebrate, or maybe you don't celebrate any of it and just have a happy Sunday, whatever. So, yeah. I am very sorry to bum you out with 10 horrible stories, but, well, that's my channel. In the meantime, as usual, you can watch more short-form cases over on my TikTok page. My link is down below in my link tree. Go ahead and follow me there if you want to see a bunch of stories from ones I've already told. If you have a case you would like me to cover, please email me at makingatruecrimerer.com. Check my case list in the link tree below first, though. Make sure the name is not already on there. If it is, please do not email me. If it is not, then email me just the name, where it happened, when it happened, and I can add it to my list. I pick my cases at random, so it could be tomorrow I cover it, or it could be 9 years from now. Who knows? Lastly, if you want to support me in any way, we do sell merch. I sell hoodies and t-shirts and wine glass and stuff like that. The link is also in the link tree. We do ship internationally, so no matter where you are in the world, Adam, who makes my merch, will ship it to you. And I will leave you with this Christmas dad joke. What is it called when a snowman has a temper tantrum? A meltdown. You're welcome. Happy holidays, everyone. Toodaloos.